The EVELYN Underhill Lecture in Christian Spirituality is an annual lecture. It had been initiated in the year 2001 by the Boston College Institute of Religious Education and Pastoral Ministry, the IREPM. Since 2008, it has been continued by the Klaus School of Theology and Ministry. In fact, the lecture is one central element of our spirituality studies initiative here at the Boston College CSTM, which includes degree concentrations in spirituality, specialized certificates, and training and support for spiritual directors and preachers. Over the years, the lecture has included the voices of Sandra Schneiders, Wilkie Au, Timothy Radcliffe, Elizabeth Johnson, Rowan Williams, Ilya Delio, Anathea Poirier-Young, and many other distinguished speakers. The lecture is named for the early 20th century mystic Evelyn Underhill, born in 1874, died in 1941. She was a married laywoman in ministry. She was the first woman invited to give a series of theological lectures at Oxford University and was the first woman invited to lead clergy retreats in the Anglican Church. Widely recognized for her classical text, Mysticism, a comprehensive study of religious experience, Underhill authored numerous works on the Christian spiritual life that have become classics. She wrote as an evangelist for reality and was convinced that a practical mysticism was not for the few, but was indeed within the reach of all. So now to today's lecture. This year's Underhill lecturer is a Jesuit priest and a teacher scholar. Here to introduce our 2026 Underhill lecturer is the CSTM's Faculty Director of Spirituality Studies, Dr. Colleen Griffith.
Thanks, Mick, and welcome everybody. Good morning. So Ryan Duns of the Society of Jesus is priest, theologian, educator, whose work explores the dynamic intersection of philosophy, theology, and contemporary culture. He's originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and in his work he brings both intellectual depth and pastoral warmth to scholarship and to teaching. Father Duns earned degrees from Canisius University, John Carroll University, Fordham University, and Boston College, forming a broad academic foundation that informs his interdisciplinary approach to theology. He currently teaches at Marquette University, where he also serves as chair of the Department of Theology. Known for his engaging classroom presence and his thoughtful mentorship, he is deeply committed to the art of teaching and to accompanying students in their intellectual and their spiritual growth. A prolific scholar, Ryan Duns is the author of the books Theology of Horror, Spiritual Exercises for a Secular Age, and co-author of Who Will You Become? An Ignatian Introduction to Catholic Theology. His writing reflects a distinctive interest in how theological ideas engage the cultural imagination, especially in unexpected places. Beyond the classroom and the page, Ryan Duns is also an accomplished Irish musician. He plays the tin whistle and accordion, frequently providing live music for Irish dance competitions, a passion that reflects his love for Irish musical tradition and also for performance. You know, some years ago, I was at a major Irish Oireachtas, which is a qualifying championship for regionally ranked Irish dancers who are hoping to get named to the roster for the World Championships in Irish Dance held in Ireland. Ryan was a musician at this large convention center event. He was playing the accordion for the dancers. And I was there as somebody who had choreographed material for a number of them. Besides being an Oireachtas musician, Ryan was the celebrant and homilist for the late Saturday afternoon liturgy that was held at the convention hall for dancers and their families that weekend. I remember that liturgy well, because at the end of it, as a focal point within the final blessing, Ryan asked the hundreds of dancers in attendance to point their toe, a move that is a hallmark start point before a dance begins in Irish dancing. The hall went silent. He proceeded to bless the feet of the dancers in that final blessing, a creative rupture that spoke volumes, assuring the dancers that the results of the weekend mattered little alongside of what those feet would do, the joy they would bring, the passion they would express, the relationships they would serve to foster. This was no ordinary musician, theologian, or priest, but rather someone who gave thought to the particularity of the community with whom he celebrated, creatively calling them to a deeper holding of their artistic praxis, bringing faith to life in a fresh and unexpected way. A short time later, I read an article in Harvard Theological Review, written by Ryan Duns, titled, "No Orthopathy Without Orthoaesthesis," in which he argued for the role of right affect in right perception, and the role of emotion and experience in right action. It was a convincing piece, but I wasn't a reader who needed more convincing. After all, I had witnessed the essence of the article's content live in Ryan's blessing of the feet of those dancers. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Clouse School of Theology and Ministry's 2026 Underhill Lecturer, Ryan Duns of the Society of Jesus.
All right, I'm going to cry. It's very nice. Thank you, Colleen. I am so grateful for your friendship and mentorship over these years and for inviting me back to Boston College. And thank you, Dean McCarthy, for your comments and hospitality of the Clouse School of Theology and Ministry. When I received the invitation to this lecture, I did look at the list of prior lectures and thought they must have made a mistake. But gratitude overcame self-doubt, and I resolved to speak as best as I can from the heart to the heart about our shared life in Christ's Spirit. I do so hoping to capture the spirit of early Jesuit preaching, to teach, to move, and to please, and I will add, to take no hostages. With that hope, let me turn to the title of my talk and begin to unpack the theological vision that will guide our time together. My talk is inspired by Underhill's Practical Mysticism, a little book for normal people. She defines mysticism. Mysticism is the art of union with reality. A mystic is a person who has attained that union in greater or less degree, or who aims at it and believes in such attainment. In the margin of my text, I wrote, "What prevents us from attaining union with the real?" Anticipating the question, she observes that it is notorious that the operations of the average human consciousness unite the self, not with things as they really are, but with images, notions, aspects of things. For Underhill, normal people are tempted to be settlers who content themselves with appearances of the real rather than risking an encounter with the real. This risk is omnipresent. Just think if you're a concert goer, we go to concerts, people pay small fortunes to attend shows only to watch the show through the screen of their phone. They settle for mediated images that they will never watch instead of being fully present to the musical reality before them. The primary obstacle to mysticism, it seems, is not God's absence, but our contentment with substitutes. Our preferences for images over reality manifest itself in everyday life. When we hold fast to fixed notions of how things or people ought to be, we become quick to dismiss whatever challenges them. The status quo offers comfort, consistency, and the reassuring sense that one's environment is under control. We have agreed, Underhill writes, for the most part to live in a world of labels. Our labels, stereotypes, and caricatures allow us to evade the responsibility of attending to what is truly other than ourselves. In our rage to impose order on reality and make it intelligible in our terms, we foreclose the possibility of the real disclosing itself on its terms. We silence creation's symbolic and sacramental depths, preferring superficial appearances instead. Underhill would agree with Iris Murdoch that, in the spiritual as in the moral life, our great enemy is the fat, relentless ego, clamoring ceaselessly for control. The self-assertive ego risks forfeiting its capacity for sacramental perception, its ability to see and experience the world charged with divine presence. Underhill diagnoses our tendencies toward idol-making and fantasy. Yet she also understands that despite efforts to shape and sculpt reality to meet our wiles and whims, reality has a knack for thwarting us. She writes, "But now and then, that symbolic character is suddenly brought home to us. Some great emotion, some devastating visitation of beauty, love, or pain lifts us to another level of consciousness, and we are aware for a moment of the difference between the neat collection of discrete objects and experiences which we call the world, and the height, the depths, the breadth of that living, growing, changing fact, of which thought, life, and energy are parts, and in which we live and move and have our being." What she names here is nothing less than an event of revelation. Then we realize that our whole life is enmeshed in great and living forces, terrible because unknown. Now and then, we too experience moments of sudden and unexpected rupture that decenter us and remind us that there is more to reality than we can measure, manage, or control. Now and then, we experience instances of calamitous breakdown that, seen aright, can come to be regarded as graced breakthroughs that attune us to the infinite depths of creation. My claim is that such ruptures, born of beauty, love, or pain, can become consecrated sites of mystical encounter, places where the real discloses itself on its terms and, in so doing, draws us into communion with the creator and sustainer of the cosmos. The word rupture describes actions, a verb, and things, a noun. As a verb, to rupture means to break apart or to burst. As a noun, a rupture is the location of a breach. In keeping with Underhill's program for a practical mysticism, allow me to offer a few examples of rupture taken from daily life. Seldom do ruptures announce themselves. Often, they are unbidden and unexpected. Whether they are received as interlopers or guests is for us to discern. Point 1. Two parents are settled in bed. There's a knock on the bedroom door. Their teenage son's head peeks around the corner, clears his throat and speaks. "Mom, Dad, I know it's late, but there's something I need to tell you." 2. A woman settles into her chair, checks her phone. As she sends a text to her spouse, the doctor arrives, his face inscrutable. He clears his throat and speaks. "Your test results have come back, and..." 3. A preacher confronts an inhospitable, hostile crowd. As they watch his every move and try to find fault with each word, he peers over them and espies a man lingering in the back. "You, over there, come here." Caught off guard, the man steps out from the shadows and moves toward the preacher, uncertain of what will come next. Each vignette captures rupture's double meaning. Something interrupts ordinary life and forces a new reckoning with reality. The sun may be popping in to say, "I love you," a happy disruption. Or he may say, "Have you ever really thought it totally unnecessary for cars to have 2 bumpers? Well, I had a little accident this evening, and..." Here, the disruption may result in restricted driving privileges and a call to the insurance agent. But if he stammers, "I'm gay. I'm struggling with an addiction," life as they know it may change forever. The rupture calls everything into question, and in the wake of this unexpected revelation, may force them to reconsider who they are as parents, who their son is to them, and how they will or will not go forward as a family. The same is true for the woman. The test results may be unremarkable, and she can return to ordinary life. Or the doctor may speak words like stage 4, malignant, and metastasize, words that rupture the world she once knew and leave her facing an uncertain future. For the man called forward, what happens next will also be decisive. Will he once more be made an object of ridicule, the butt of jokes? Or will the preacher say or do something that offers hope and life to one who has long dwelt in shadow? In each, the rupture demands a renegotiation of one's relationship with reality. The parents may cling so desperately to an image of their son that they cannot, indeed will not, welcome his disclosure. We raised you better than that. Get out of our house. Then again, his revelation may move them in a life-giving way, inciting them to respond with love, acceptance, and a shared commitment to understanding and embracing a new normal grounded in mercy and charity. For the woman, news of a dire diagnosis may uncover a secret reservoir of courage. For the man, the preacher's voice may draw him forward in hope. In each case, the site of rupture has the potential to be a place of desecration and alienation, or one of consecration and reconciliation. So too for all of us. The question is not whether we will face ruptures, but whether and how, in moments of breakdown, we will discern how God's Spirit is laboring to break through and make all things new. I want to consider how events of rupture, sites where we experience the devastating visitation of beauty, love, or pain that lifts us to another level of consciousness, can be experienced as consecrated. To accompany our exploration and to discern these events, I invite Irish philosopher William Desmond into our midst. He's a handsome fellow, isn't he? I encountered Desmond's work while studying in Austria. A fellow student told me that I would like him because you Irish stick together. After supper, I went digging. Desmond is from Cork and earned his PhD at Penn State. His teaching career took him back and forth across the Atlantic, and he retired from Leuven in Belgium in 2017. It was a great retirement party. Today he teaches at Villanova, and no, he did not teach the Pope. Desmond is known for a practice of philosophy called metaxological metaphysics. Say that 3 times. Before you reach for the smelling salts, let me explain. He regards metaphysics as a mindful practice, as a way of engaging with and inquiring into the meaning of creation. This practice of metaphysics seeks to awaken us to the way we already abide in the metaxu, or between. Our lives, he maintains, unfold within the metaxu, taking shape in the space between birth and death, between being and nothingness, between the finite and the infinite. Playing on the double meaning of the Greek meta, his metaphysics begins when we discover ourselves in the midst, the first meaning of meta, of finite beings. As we ponder and are struck by the gratuity and non-necessity of creation, our minds are directed beyond, second meaning of meta, the immanent realm toward the transcendent source of existence. Metaphysics, so practiced, ruptures of any sense of creation being just there by enkindling a sense of astonishment that all creation is sustained, to use the poet Denise Levertov's image, in a trembling web of being. It is from this metaxu, this renewed sense of being between, that Desmond invites us to rethink creation, our relation to one another, and our deepest longings for God. I was captivated by the word metaxological. To give a reasoned account, a logos, of this metaxu in which we live and move and have our being, struck me as a worthy vocation. I immersed myself in his work and discovered that his writing was not only informative, but transformative. His poetic style of philosophy altered not just the way I thought, but also the way I perceived the world. He taught me to attend carefully to the gratuity of existence and to be mindful of the porous between in which creation unfolds. Now, lest this become a lecture on the finer points of metaphysics, let us look at two of the poems found in his book, God and the Between. Each chapter is headed by an original poem. The final chapter is comprised of 10 metaphysical cantos. These poems and cantos record his effort to enact the practice of metaphysics. Instead of writing about metaphysics, his verses uncover points of ingress, invitatory ruptures, that allow us to experience the rhythmic movement between philosophical argument and prayerful meditation. We shall look first at the poem that introduces the volume and then at the canto that concludes it. The focus of our inquiry will be ruptures that call us deeper into reality's mysterious depths. The opening poem. Between you and all of us, we do not have the first word. We are spoken to first. The first word comes in the cooing of the mother, and we are wooed into words, coming into conversations long underway without us. Wooed into words, we come too early to presumption and complaint. We begin as eavesdroppers. Desmond, like Augustine and Anselm, begins in prayer addressing a transcendent you whose speaking precedes our own. Before we ever speak, we are addressed. The central stanza deepens this. We are initiated into language by others, each of us quite literally spoken into being. We are cooed, sung, scolded, lullabied into speech. From infancy, from infancia, Latin for not speaking, we are stitched into a community of language users. That community makes it possible for us to speak at all, and ultimately to address the divine you who creates and sustains all things. But the poem also reminds us that the very words that make prayer possible can be turned toward presumption and complaint. Speech can curse the created order, or it can consecrate the metaxu, the in-between world we inhabit. This reveals a tension at the heart of human existence. Words open us to communion, but they also make alienation possible. Language binds us together, yet it can also fracture shared meaning. A kiss is never just a kiss, as Judas's betrayal of Jesus makes clear. If language can wound as well as bless, the question becomes, what does redeemed speech look like? Desmond suggests an answer, not through logic alone. His poetry, like his philosophy, manifests a hospitality to different voices and vantage points. I liken it to an Irish musical session. Musicians gather, fiddles, flutes, whistles, accordions, borons, banjos, and join their musical voices. As the session unfolds and the players grow comfortable with each other, the music takes on a life of its own. No single instrument predominates, each musical voice preserved and allowed to sound within the whole. It used to be like the Greenbrier. Every Monday night, all through theology. That was an education. Listeners tap their feet, clap along, and often a step dancer is inspired to dance, creating a rhythmic metaxu in which everyone shares. How fitting for today's talk that attendees, if so moved, may remark, the crack was mighty. The crack, the joyful ambience, the shared culture, the rift, a rupture between the workaday and living culture, the rift that invites participants to be part of something more. The poem reminds us that we are always in the between. We do not have the first word. We are opened for speech because we have been opened by the speech of others. We are, in a way, ruptured speakers. Our agency is grounded in a prior givenness we neither initiate nor control. How easily we forget this. As Desmond observes, we tend to overemphasize our doing, our striving, what he calls the conatus ascendi. You can make that a tattoo. The grasping at being. Iris Murdoch would recognize in this unchecked conatus a trace of that fat, relentless ego. Many of us know the conatus by the way we slyly distort the Lord's Prayer, my will be done. Desmond does not deny the importance of self-assertion, yet he places it in a wider horizon through poetic recollection. Before we speak, we must be spoken to. Before we grasp at being, we must be given to be. The poem recalls this primal givenness. We receive being, what he calls the passio essendi, the undergoing of being, before we can take a stand on our existence. His metaphysics, therefore, does not portray us as sovereign masters and possessors of nature. Rather, by returning us to the rupture of the first word, the word that opens us for speech, the word through whom all things came into being, he summons us beyond presumption and complaint toward astonished contemplation of the mystery that there is something rather than nothing. All is gift. All expresses God's grace. The poem performs a poesis, a making. Its making leads us back to the first rupture of speech, the mother's coo, the creator's decision to speak the cosmos into being. By revisiting this oft-forgotten beginning, the poem unsettles our sense of autonomy and rekindles the awareness that we stand in the presence of a mystery that sings us into existence and, through grace, invites us into the song. Despite the delusions of the self-assertive conatus, we learn to embrace our vocation to relax into the undergoing that sustains us and guides us on our lifelong pilgrimage toward communion with the Holy One. The metaxu, named in the opening line, between you and all of us, is therefore not neutral terrain. It is a dynamic community sung into being by the Creator, and we always are invited to take our place in the song. Meditating on the gratuity of being given to be, we begin to see creation as a gift, given for no reason other than love. Christian doctrine of creatio ex nihilo ceases to function as a metaphysical explanation and becomes a celebration of faith. The deepest reason and sustaining source of creation is nothing less than love. By recalling the porosity of the cosmos and its openness to the Creator, the poem draws us into a consecrated rupture where we cease taking creation for granted and begin to behold it as granted, as given by God. God in the Between begins in the desert of atheism. Its chapters trace a philosophical pilgrimage, first toward new ways to God, and finally toward new ways of speaking of God. As we continue our journey with Desmond, moving from the dark night of godlessness toward the luminous darkness of the God beyond thought and language, we are poetically schooled in new ways of thinking, perceiving, and praying. Let's turn to Desmond's final canto, God Being Too Good, at the end of the book. Longer than the first poem, it can be read as a meditation on what it means to call God good, and the way our words falter and are ruptured in their effort to speak. While I find the entire poem suggestive, constraints of time and your attention will focus us to concentrate on a few stanzas. Being good, it dies beside the mortal. It comes to life again. It never dies alone. We do not realize the love reserved for mortals. Being good, it is not the unborn child. Its promise is more. Without its promise, the unborn child is not sent out from darkness to darkness. Without its promise, the wandering born are lost in wayless wastes. Being good, you alone keep your promise. The bird in the dark sings 3 times, and its song is not the rooster's, announcing triple treason to the dawn. Killers know the secret streak of God's quietness and are not ashamed. The living forget its radiance. The holy feel its flame and are branded with its blaze. By the flaring of this fire, we behold your face in the criminal innocence of the saving one. Note the tonal difference. The first poem stressed the distance and transcendence of the divine you. These verses addressed to the same you are intimate. The you here, still in the mode of prayer, is neither aloof nor unconcerned. This you is proximate, present in our midst as a companion and guide. The canto provokes a question. What does it mean to call God good? Its response unsettles our ordinary assumptions, rupturing and reconfiguring what we mean by goodness and what it means to call God good. To see why, consider how we learn to use the word good. We call a computer, a basketball, or a car good when it performs as expected. As our tastes mature, we learn to distinguish good wine from swill, thank you Jesuits, good music and the salt on the eardrums, good decor from garish tackiness. Just as we are initiated into language, we are also schooled in evaluation. We learn from daily life what it means to be a good child, a good spouse, a good employee, even a good Christian. So we think. Armed with a notion of goodness drawn from ordinary experience, we are tempted to apply it directly to God, as though God were simply another thing in our world. But if our understanding of God's goodness is tethered too tightly, Underhill notes, to images, notions, aspects of things, then it is no surprise that calling God good begins to seem thin, inadequate, or even inappropriate. A Christian understanding of divine goodness cannot rest on a prior understanding of things. Rather, our notion of goodness must be reshaped by the revealed logic of the disruptive Word who enters history, becoming flesh and dwelling among us. For Christians, God's goodness appears as an incarnate presence that ministers, suffers, and liberates. It unsettles our expectations of beauty, propriety, and justice when it appears by firelight in the criminal innocence of Christ's face, or today, in the faces of prophets willing to speak on behalf of God's kingdom, no matter the cost. What are the contours of this goodness? God's goodness takes the form of divine accompaniment, God present throughout the whole arc of mortal life. From our beginning in the darkness of the womb to the moment we are commended to the silence of the tomb, no one is abandoned or unattended. Divine goodness becomes a resurrecting promise, a pledge that I will be with you until the end of the age. And yet, in a broken world, this goodness appears as the criminal innocence that provokes sinful humanity to an act of unspeakable violence. St. Paul grasped the paradox: the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. My grace is sufficient for you, for power, got that. Should have my glasses. For Desmond, the revelation of God's goodness does more than inform us about God. It transforms how we live before the Holy One. To know this goodness is not to grasp a truth, but to be grasped by the truth that draws us as disciples into a paradoxical form of life where presence is stronger than power, vulnerability truer than dominance, and love revealed most fully where the world sees only weakness. And when I teach students about Jesus, which I love to do, I know better than to bedazzle or befuddle them with metaphysics. I reserve that for you. My approach, in keeping with the theme of my talk, is to challenge the tendency to domesticate Jesus by uncovering the way his words and works were and continue to be provocative. I love Jesus' parables because despite our efforts to domesticate them, they are hardly quaint illustrations of moral truths. They are instead crafted disruptions that confront our assumptions with the strange mercy of God's kingdom. Imaginative productions of the Logos, parables are narrative sites of consecrated rupture that reveal the inbreaking of God's kingdom and summon us into its service. Think of the parable of the prodigal son, or better, the prodigal father, which appends our sense of propriety. Dignified men do not celebrate the return of ungrateful sons. Yet God's goodness shatters convention and signals the arrival of a new culture of love. In Luke's parable of the banquet, a feast is prepared and invitations are sent, but guests decline with excuses. Instead of canceling the feast, the host invites those others we would never think to include. Gerhard Lofink writes, "The parable is meant to shock and frighten. It is meant to warn, to reveal blindness, and to lead to repentance." The rupture here is a warning against the inertia that finds 1,000 reasons to ignore the banquet offered to us. So too with Mark's parable of the sower, often flattened into a moral lesson about our receptivity to God's word. Missing is the sower's lavish generosity. He sows freely and recklessly. How many homilies place us at the center? What kind of soil are you? while missing that the parable's true agent and subject is a God of disruptive generosity. Parables record sites of consecrated rupture by giving us a glimpse of a divine logic that stands at odds with our normal sense of goodness and justice. We think of goodness as something we achieve through self-exertion. As the parables reveal, the canon of goodness is measured by divine self-donation, a love that gives itself away without counting the cost. We cannot compel or control this. We can only willingly undergo it. God's gracious self-giving liberates, empowers, and renews those who receive it. Old sinful ways collapse as one is drawn mystically into a new mode of life, the way of Christian discipleship, the way of the cross. One begins to become, in EVELYN Underhill's words, a living and breathing theophany, revealing God in and to the world. With Desmond, we have considered how practicing metaphysics can renew the way we live and move within the metaxu. We come to ourselves, we become ourselves amid finite beings. When we pause to reflect on the gratuity of creation, we feel the bite of astonishment that anything exists at all. All that is, yet need not be. Rocked into this astonishment, our minds are directed beyond the finite toward the infinite source and sustainer of all being. Reflecting on the one who speaks the cosmos into existence changes how we attend to reality. Creation is not something necessary, but given, a gift whose deepest meaning is divine love. Our pilgrimage leads to a courtyard fire where we behold the face of criminal innocence that requires us to rethink our sense of goodness, so fitting for Palm Sunday. As they raise the images and idols we construct, we are invited to imagine how we might live as citizens of God's kingdom. In shattering our idols and purging the images that prevent us from engaging the real, events of disruption can be interpreted as ruptures that open and invite us to a new and graciously renewed way of life. In the home stretch. No hostages, I promise you. Underhill envisioned practical mysticism as a training of latent faculties, a bracing and a brightening of languid consciousness, an emancipation from the fetters of appearance, a turning of attention to new levels of the world. For her, mysticism is an ascetic practice, a chastening and disciplining of our tendency to impose meaning on the real, rather than allowing the real to reveal itself. In our workaday world, the suggestion that we be mystics sounds peculiar. Sure, Karl Rahner prophesied that future Christians would be a mystic or nothing at all, but that must have been an exaggeration, right? For most of us, Underhill saw, our world is real, solid, and self-consistent, and we simply have little time for pondering other planes of reality. Thus, she continues, the first business of the missionary is to create some feeling of dissatisfaction with the world within which the practical person has always lived and acted, to suggest something of its fragmentary and subjective character. Desmond is a metaphysical missionary. In prose and poetry, he asks us to rethink the nature of reality and to experience anew the primal porosity that opens us to one another and to our Creator. He offers us a metaphysics of creation, a poetry of creation, and communion that empowers us to see not a different reality, but to behold reality differently and as charged with divine presence. How might we find or encounter the mystical in everyday life? I have long been drawn to Rahner's description of mysticism as a radical experience of faith which destroys the conceptual and the categorical insofar as these claim to be ultimate realities. Mysticism attunes the senses to perceive reality's hitherto concealed depths. Guided by the Spirit, mysticism is a grace-guided making that touches and transforms the way we perceive and dwell in the world. Every mystical encounter entails some form of rupture that graciously turns one from idols, and as one is drawn to face, to know, and to be known by the holy mystery that invites us to a new mode of life. I said earlier that Jesus' words and works continue to be provocative, and if you will indulge me, I'm a companion of Jesus, I would like to spend our remaining minutes reflecting on a case of consecrated rupture. I foreshadowed in the vignette of the preacher calling out a lurking man. I would like you to use your Ignatian imaginations to enter the scene as an engaged onlooker. In this passage from Mark 3, we find ourselves at the site of breakdown that, at Christ's initiative, becomes an event of gracious breakthrough, of consecrated rupture. The passage is familiar. Jesus entered the synagogue, and a man was there who had a withered hand. The religious authorities watched him to see whether he would cure him on the Sabbath so that they might accuse him. And Jesus said to the man with the withered hand, "Come forward." Then Jesus said to the authorities, "Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. He looked around at them with anger. He was grieved at their hardness of heart and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and conspired with other leaders against Jesus. In your imagination, see the man lurking in the synagogue shadows. He is drawn here, out of habit, out of hope, even though he is not welcome. Everyone knows his deformity, and try as he might, he's never able to conceal it from others. So he skulks in the shadows, his withered hand buried deep in his robe's folds. He has been alienated so long from his community that he accepts his state as his fate. In flesh and spirit, he is ruptured and broken. And yet, he heard a preacher, this Jesus, and longs to see him again, and goes to the temple with a desire to hear more. The man watches as Jesus gets hassled by religious authorities. This man, grew with a few of them and used to play with them until they grew old enough to know that one does not play with the infirm, the broken, and the impure. Almost overnight, his hand had redefined their friendship, and they grew apart. It wasn't proper, it just wasn't good to be seen with the cripple. Everyone knows, of course, that a withered hand is a sign of God's disfavor. It's a punishment, so steer clear. The man understood this way of thinking, for it was his worldview too. But something about this preacher, the way he spoke and interacted with others, led the man to believe that he somehow saw things differently. Suddenly, the man is aware that Jesus is looking past the authorities and has locked his eye on him. His voice, loud and commanding, echoes in the temple. "You over there, come here." The man's heart freezes at being called to, and worse, called out of the safety of the shadows. He cannot, however, resist the summons. He walks forward, hand concealed, to stand by Jesus, who is surrounded by former friends. Jesus addresses them and challenges their understanding of the Sabbath and of God. Were God's rules meant to help humans or to burden them? Are they life-giving or life-taking? Of course God's rules are life-giving so long as you play by the rules. This cripple, authorities think to themselves, fell afoul of the rules. He has gotten his just deserts. This is simply the way things are, the way God wills things to be. This is sin's status quo. And Jesus does the unthinkable. Friend, reach out your hand. Everyone here knows the hand he is talking about, the hand that is such stigma and source of shame. Tired of living in shadow and shame, however, the man detects in his command something more, and his heart is stirred with a flicker of hope. He does as bidden. He trusts, he believes, and he responds in faith to the command to do what he knows on his own he cannot do. Freeing his hand from the fabric's fold, he extends it toward Jesus, who clasps it in his hands. "Stretch it out," he says, and the hand opens slowly. The authorities are enraged. Who is Jesus to challenge, to disrupt their social order? Who is he to call the outsider to the synagogue center? The authorities have seen rabble-rousers like this before, and they know the trouble they can cause to the well-balanced world. He must be stopped. The man made whole walks outside, throwing pebbles at the sky with his healed hand, praising God for delivering him from the darkness into the light. He steps through the consecrated rupture into a new future. The religious leaders, scandalized by the disruption, gather in a conspiratorial cluster to plot a way to rid themselves of this irritating preacher. Each of us, I think, recognizes a part of ourselves in the man with the withered hand. We mutter fearfully to ourselves, if they only knew about, if anyone knew that, could anyone love me? We hide significant parts of ourselves, we hold back, and we take refuge on the margins. None of us is a stranger to the ruptures that alienate us from others. In my ministry, it is a privilege to sit with people who have lived with a withered hand for a long, long time. It is likewise my privilege to accompany them as they unfurl that hand, past mistakes, addictions, patterns of behavior that need to be healed, wounds inflicted by others, because they believe that, despite doubts and misgivings, they can be healed and made whole. I've never seen a severed arm regrow or an amputated leg regenerate, but I have watched as those who have been suffocating in fear and shame are liberated by a mystical experience of God's disruptive mercy that delivers them from alienation and restores them to life and community. Empowered by charity and fortified by faith, these people dare to revisit the site of breakdown and discover in the rubble an opening, a grace-initiated breakthrough that brings healing, hope, and the confidence to stand beneath the cross. A consecrated rupture indeed. But to conclude, at the heart of Underhill's practical mysticism is the practice of attention, of mindful attunement to the oft-neglected depths of the real. We cannot force reality to reveal itself, but through a practice of attentive watchfulness, we can prepare ourselves to receive and undergo these disclosures when they occur. Encountering the mystical dimension of daily life is not reserved for spiritual elites. If we slow down, if we permit ourselves to be present in and to the world, we can find ourselves struck and moved by the too muchness of existence. The surprise of a sunrise, astonishment at the fragile beauty of a newborn, quiet moments spent with a beloved, hearing longed-for words, thank you, I love you, I forgive you, daring to ask, please forgive me. In ways great and small, unexpected disruptions of daily life can jostle us free from sedimented patterns to reveal new spiritual paths. These are graced moments, consecrated ruptures that can guide us into communion with God and neighbor. We cannot plan these encounters, we cannot chart a predetermined course, but with hearts transformed through undergoing the graced passio of God's Spirit, we can learn to walk these paths as they unfold, moving from harrowing darkness into the hallowed light of divine presence. We can learn to witness and welcome the epiphanies of everyday life. So I end with a poem drawn fittingly from the middle, or the metaxu of God in the between. Now I'm going to, so Colleen mentioned Irish music. This is so much easier than carrying an accordion under your coat, I can assure you. I shall accompany your reading with a bit of whistle music, if that's okay with you. And I invite you to allow verse and melody occasion within you something of a graced turning, a passio caritatis, an undergoing of divine charity, of grace, that helps you to attend more faithfully to life's ruptures, to those moments that turn us suddenly and send us on new and unexpected courses. May this turning, no matter how unsettling, be the first step in a spirit-led homecoming, returning each of us to the eternal embrace of the one who creates us, sustains us, and gently calls us home. Thank you.